Hey everybody, this is Jeff Richardson. What's up? Oh, I just realized I could record this. Hold on. Gonna read some more chapters from Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here from 1935. Real quick, let me set this up. A doot doo doot, a doodle doo doo doo. Let's make sure that the playthrough is off. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. All right. So, once again, I'm Jeff. Friends call me Jefe. I changed the camera angle this time. I don't know. Why not? I had to move some things around to do a podcast episode with Nakane and JV Hampton Van Sant. That should be out in a few weeks. Yeah, that's everything is awesome. So let's see. It's been a few days since I read those chapters, and ballots came out today and some Saturday. So I got to vote. So whatever. I'll vote green like always, but I'm in a safe state, so it doesn't really matter. I feel like it's 90% of human activity, but it doesn't really matter. But ethics are all about doing what you'd like everybody to do, or more people to do anyway. And somebody's got to do it, so might as well be you. So um it should be mandatory, honestly, voting. It's so dumb that it isn't, but whatever. This country has so many barriers to truth and good government. It makes sense. All right, here we go. Voices and everything. Let's see if I remember any of them. Chapter 8. Quoting now. I don't pretend to be a very educated man, except maybe educated in the heart, and in being able to feel for the sorrows and fear of every ordinary fellow human being. Still in all, I've read the Bible through, from kiver to kiver, like my wife's folks say down in Arkansas, some 11 times. I've read all the law books they've printed, and as contemporaries, I don't guess I've missed much of all the grand literature produced by Bruce Barton, Edgar Guest, Arthur Brisbane, Elizabeth Dilling, Walter Pitkin, and William Dudley Pelley. This last gentleman I honor not only for his rattling good yarns and his serious work in investigating life beyond the grave and absolutely proving that only a blind fool could fail to believe in personal immortality, but finally for his public spirited and self sacrificing work in founding the Silver Shirts. These true knights, even if they did not attain quite all the success they deserved, were one of our most noble and Galahad like attempts to combat the sneaking, snaky, sinister, surreptitious, seditious plots of the red radicals and other sour brands of Bolsheviks that incessantly threaten the American standards of liberty, high wages, and universal security. These fellows have messages, and we haven't got time for anything in literature except a straight, hard hitting, heart throbbing message. 0 Hour, Berzelius Windrip. I haven't read Mein Kampf, but this feels very Mein Kampfy, just from what little I've gathered through osmosis. During the very first week of his campaign, Senator Windrip clarified his philosophy by issuing his distinguished proclamation, "The 15 Points of Victory for the Forgotten Men." The 15 planks, in his own words, or maybe in Lee Saracen's words, or Dewey Hake's words, were these: 1. All finance in the country, including banking, insurance, stocks and bonds and mortgages, shall be under the absolute control of a federal central bank, owned by the government and conducted by a board appointed by the president, which board shall, without need of recourse to Congress for legislative authorization, be empowered to make all regulations governing finance. Thereafter, as soon as may be practicable, this said board shall consider the nationalization and government ownership for the profit of the whole people of all mines, oil fields, water power, public utilities, transportation, and communication. 2. The president shall appoint a commission equally divided between manual workers, employers, and representatives of the public to determine which labor unions are qualified to represent the workers and report to the executive for legal action all pretended labor organizations. My roommate's coming home. Hello! Stuff falling on my backpack. Sorry, I should have turned the light on. Now it's getting dark.
I shifted my schedule.
Uh-oh.
Light out when I leave. So doing 9 to 5 now.
Okay. Well, I'll leave the light on for you.
Thank you.
Let's see, where was I? 2, the president shall appoint a commission equally divided between manual workers, employers, and representatives of the public to determine which labor unions are qualified to represent the workers and report to the executive for legal action all pretended labor organizations, whether, quote, company unions or red unions controlled by communists and the so-called Third International. The duly recognized unions shall be constituted bureaus of the government with power of decision in all labor disputes. Later, the same investigation and official recognition shall be extended to farm organizations. In this elevation of the position of the worker, it shall be emphasized that the League of Forgotten Men is the chief bulwark against the menace of destructive and un American radicalism. 3. In contradistinction to the doctrines of red radicals, with their felonious expropriation of the arduously acquired possessions which ensure to aged persons their security, this league and party will guarantee private initiative and the right to private property for all time. I have some kind of thing with my back today. Sorry. 4. Believing that only under God Almighty, to whom we render all homage, do we Americans hold our vast power, we shall guarantee to all persons absolute freedom of religious worship, provided, however, that no atheist, agnostic, believer in black magic, nor any Jew who shall refuse to swear allegiance to the New Testament, nor any person of any faith who refuses to take the pledge to the flag, shall be permitted to hold any public office or to practice as a teacher, professor, lawyer, judge, or as a physician, except in the category of obstetrics. Whoa. Oh, I should have my little card. Commentary. Holy shit. So they're doing religious shit, controlling people based on their religion. That's fucked up. But interesting, that weird cutout for obstetrics. That gives me the sense that like that's going to come into play in the story. Maybe they'll start controlling women's pregnancies. All right. Let's see. Should make sure it's still going. Yep. All right. 5. Annual net income per person shall be limited to $500,000. No accumulated fortune may at any one time exceed $3 million per person. No one person shall, during his entire lifetime, be permitted to retain an inheritance or various inheritances in total exceeding 2,000 or $2 million. All incomes or estates in excess of the sums named shall be seized by the federal government for use in relief and in administrative expenses. 6. Profit shall be taken out of war by seizing all dividends over and above 6% that shall be received from the manufacture, distribution, or sale during wartime of all arms, munitions, aircraft, ships, tanks, and all other things directly applicable to warfare, as well as from food, textiles, and all other supplies furnished to the American or to any allied army. Sorry, my dad's calling me. Hopefully, it's not important. Ugh. Sorry. All right. Oh, I should share that I'm doing this. Somebody might want to hear about it. All right, where was I? What's that? Here we go. All right, back at it. Um, 7. Our armaments and the size of our military and naval establishments shall be consistently enlarged until they shall equal, but since this country has no desire for foreign conquest of any kind, not surpass in every branch of the forces of defense the martial strength of any other single country or empire in the world. Upon inauguration, this league and party shall make this its first obligation, together with the issuance of a firm proclamation to all nations of the world that our armed forces are to be maintained solely for the purpose of ensuring world peace and amity. 8. Congress shall have the sole right to issue money, and immediately upon our inauguration, it shall at least double the present supply of money in order to facilitate the fluidity of credit. 9. We cannot too strongly condemn the unchristian attitude of certain otherwise progressive nations in their discriminations against the We cannot too strongly condemn the unchristian attitude of certain otherwise progressive nations in their discriminations against the Jews, who have been among the strongest supporters of the League, and who will continue to prosper and to be recognized as fully Americanized, though only so long as they continue to support our ideals. 10. 10. All Negroes shall be prohibited from voting, holding public office. Shit. Yeah. Wow. Commentary. Prohibited from voting, holding public office, practicing law, medicine, or teaching in any class above the grade of grammar school, and they shall be taxed 100% of all sums in excess of $10,000 per family per year, which they may earn or in any other manner receive. In order, however, to give the most sympathetic aid possible to all, I don't want to keep saying the word, Negroes who comprehend their proper and valuable place in society, all such persons, male or female, as can prove that they have devoted not less than 45 years to such suitable tasks as domestic service, agricultural labor, and common labor in industries, shall at the age of 65 be permitted to appear before a special board composed entirely of white persons, and upon proof that while they employed, they have never been idle except through sickness, they shall be recommended for pensions not to exceed the sum of $500 per person per year, not to exceed $700 per family. They shall, by definition, be persons. Negroes shall, by definition, be persons with at least 1/16 colored blood. All right. I understand the 30s were fucked up, but it's hard to read. All right. 11. Far from opposing such high minded and economically sound methods of the relief of poverty, unemployment, and old age as the EPIC plan of the Honorable Upton Sinclair, the quote, share the wealth and every man a king proposals of the late Honorable Huey Long to assure every family $5,000 a year, the Townsend plan, the Utopian plan, technocracy, and all competent schemes of unemployment insurance, a commission shall immediately be appointed by the new administration to study, reconcile, and recommend for immediate adoption the best features in these several plans for Social Security, and the Honorable Messrs. Sinclair, Townsend, Eugene Reed, and Howard Scott are herewith invited to in every way advise and collaborate with that commission. 12. All women now employed shall, as rapidly as possible, except in such peculiarly peculiar all women now employed shall, as rapidly as possible, except in such peculiarly feminine spheres of activity as nursing and beauty parlors, be assisted to return to their incomparably sacred duties as homemakers and as mothers of strong, honorably future citizens of the Commonwealth. Ugh. 13. Any person advocating communism, socialism, or anarchism, advocating refusal to enlist in case of war, or advocating alliance with Russia in any way or advocating alliance with Russia in any war whatsoever shall be subject to trial for high treason, with a minimum penalty of 20 years at hard labor in prison and a maximum of death on the gallows or other form of execution which the judges may find convenient. What the fuck? That's this is like not even satire anymore. Like Hitler killed those people. Ah, fuck. I mean, you know. God. All right. Back to the reading. 14. All bonuses promised to former soldiers of any war in which America has ever engaged shall be immediately paid in full, in cash, and in all cases of veterans with incomes of less than $5,000 a year, the formerly promised sums shall be doubled. 15. Congress shall, immediately upon our inauguration, initiate amendments to the Constitution providing A, that the President shall have the authority to institute and execute all necessary measures for the conduct of the government during this critical epoch. B, that Congress shall serve only in an advisory capacity. Whoa. This motherfucker told them before getting elected that he would make Congress advisory. That's a little unlikely, but okay. I don't think even Hitler did that. 15. Congress shall immediately upon our inauguration initiate amendments to the Constitution providing A, that the President shall have the authority to institute and execute all necessary measures for the conduct of the government during this critical epoch. B, that Congress shall serve only in an advisory capacity, calling to the attention of the President and his aides and cabinet any needed legislation, but not acting upon same until authorized by the President so to act, and C, that the Supreme Court shall immediately have removed from its jurisdiction the power to negate by ruling them to be unconstitutional or by any other judicial action, any or all acts of the President, his duly appointed aides, or Congress. Addendum. It shall be strictly understood that, as the League of the Forgotten Men and the Democratic Party, as now constituted, have no purpose nor desire to carry out any measure that shall not unqualifiedly meet with the desire of the majority of voters in these United States, the League and Party regard none of the above 15 points as obligatory and unmodifiable except number 15, and upon the others they will act or refrain from acting in accordance with the general desire of the public, who shall, under the new regime, be again granted an individual freedom of which they have been deprived by the harsh and restrictive economic measures of former administrations, both Republican and Democratic. Okay. So if we're looking at this as satire that could relate to now, party platforms are meaningless. Like all they are, they're where you shoot for the moon, where you're supposed to. And then your party members never do anything about it because it's hard to do because it's all partisan shit, right? But it should guide you, right? It should guide you to what you want. And in the case of that document being put into practice by an authoritarian regime, uh, it might not be toilet paper. You know what I mean? If you could actually do all these things, maybe it would be true. So I think that's what's happening here is that the combination of all these fucked up ideas and absolute power is unconscionable and terrifying. And the idea was, I believe, Lewis's idea was to terrify the reader, who would then go tell their friends and family, "Oh shit, have you read this book? We don't want Hitler. Let's vote for Roosevelt," or whatever. So anyway, back to it. "But what does it mean?" marveled Mrs. Jessup when her husband had read the platform to her. "It's so inconsistent. Sounds like a combination of Norman Thomas and Calvin Coolidge. I don't seem to understand it. I wonder if Mr. Winthrop understands it himself." "Sure, you bet he does. It mustn't be supposed that because Winthrop gets that intellectual dressmaker Saracen to prettify his ideas up for him, he doesn't recognize 'em and clasp 'em to his bosom when they're dolled up in $2 words. I'll tell you just what it all means. Articles 1 and 5 mean that if the financiers and transportation kings and so on don't come through heavily with support for Buzz, they may be threatened with bigger income taxes and some control of their businesses. But they are coming through, I hear, handsomely. They're paying for Buzz's radio and his parades. Two, that by controlling their unions directly, Buzz's gang can kidnap all labor into slavery. Three backs up the security for big capital, and four brings the preachers into line as scared and unpaid press agents for Buzz. Six doesn't mean anything at all. Munitions firms with vertical trusts will be able to wangle 6% on manufacture, one on transportation, and one on sales at least. Seven means we'll get ready to follow all the European nations in trying to hog the whole world. Eight means that by inflation, big industrial companies will be able to buy their outstanding bonds back at a cent on the dollar. And nine, that all Jews who don't cough up plenty of money for the robber baron will be punished, even including the Jews who haven't much to cough up. Hey. Sorry. Let's see. Eight means that by inflation, blah, blah, blah. Nine, that all Jews who don't cough up plenty of money for the robber baron will be punished, even including the Jews who haven't much to cough up. 10, that all well paying jobs and businesses held by Negroes will be grabbed by the poor white trash among Buzz's worshippers, and that instead of being denounced, they'll be universally praised as patriotic protectors of racial purity. 11, that Buzz will be able to pass the buck for not creating any real relief for poverty. 12, that women will later lose the vote and the right to higher education and be foxed out of all decent jobs and urged to rear soldiers to be killed in forge and urged to rear soldiers to be killed in foreign wars. 13, that anybody who opposes Buzz in any way at all can be called a communist and scragged for it. Why, under this clause, Hoover and Al Smith and Ogden Mills, yes, and you and me, will all be communists. 14, that Buzz thinks enough of the support of the veterans boat to be willing to pay high for it in other people's money. And 15, well, that's the one lone clause that really does mean something. And it means that Windrip and Lee Saracen and Bishop Prang, and I guess maybe this Colonel Dewey Hake and this Dr. Hector McGoblin, This doctor that helps write the high minded hymns for Buzz, they've realized that this country has gone so flabby that any gang daring enough and unscrupulous enough and smart enough not to seem illegal can grab hold of the entire government and have all the power and applause and salutes, all the money and palaces and women and all the money and palaces and willing women they want. They're only a handful, but just think how small Lenin's gang was at first, and Mussolini's, and Hitler's, and Kemal Pasha's, and Napoleon's. You'll see all the liberal preachers and modernist educators and discontented newspaper men and farm agitators. Maybe they'll worry it maybe they'll worry at first, but they'll get caught up in the web of propaganda like we all were in the Great War, and they'll all be convinced that even if our Buzzy maybe has got a few faults, he's on the side of the plain people and against all the tight old political machines, and they'll rouse the country for him as the great liberator. And meanwhile, big business will just wink and sit tight. And then, by God, this crook, I don't know whether he's more of a crook or an hysterical religious fanatic, along with Saracen and Hake and Prang and McGoblin, these five men will be able to set up a regime that'll remind you of Henry Morgan the pirate capturing a merchant ship. But will Americans stand for it long? Whimpered Emma. Oh, no, not people like us, the descendants of the pioneers. I don't know. I'm going to try help see that they don't. Of course, you understand that you and I and Sissy and Fowler and Mary will probably be shot if I try to do anything. I sound brave enough now, but probably I'll be scared to death when I hear Buzz's private troops go marching by. Yeah. Yeah. If you threaten these people's interests enough, well enough, loudly enough, they'll come get you. They got Dr. King, they got Malcolm, they got the rest of them. Don't Google Ferguson organizers' deaths. It's not great. Yeah. All right. Moving on. Oh, you will be careful, won't you? Begged Emma. Oh, before I forget it, how many times must I tell you, Dormouse, not to give foolish chicken bones? They'll stick in his poor throat and choke him to death. And you just never remember to take the keys out of the car when you put it in the garage at night. I'm perfectly sure Shad Ledoux or somebody will steal it one of these nights. Father Stephen Parafix, when he read the 15 points, was considerably angrier than Doremus. He snorted. What? Negroes? Jews? Women? They all banned and they leave us Catholics out this time? Hitler didn't neglect us. He's persecuted us. Must be that Charlie Coughlin. He's made us too respectable. Sissy, who was eager to go to a school of architecture and become a creator of new styles in houses of glass and steel, Lorinda Pike, who had plans for a Carlsbad Vichy Saratoga in Vermont, Mrs. Candy, who aspired to a home bakery of her own when she should be too old for domestic labor, They were all of them angrier than either Doremus or Father Parafix. Sissy sounded not like a flirtatious girl, but like a battling woman as she snarled, "So the League of Forgotten Men is going to make us a League of Forgotten Women? Send us back to washing diapers and leaching out ashes for soap? Let us read Louisa May Alcott and Barn, except on the Sabbath, of course. Let us sleep in humble gratitude with men." "Sissy!" wailed her mother. "Like Shad Ledoux? Well, Dad, you can sit right down and write Busy Berzelius for me that I'm going to England on the next boat." Mrs. Candy stopped drying the water glasses with the soft dish towels which she scrupulously washed out daily, long enough to croak, "What nasty men! I do hope they get shot soon." Which, for Mrs. Candy, was a startlingly long and humanitarian statement. Yes, nasty enough. But what I've got to keep remembering is that Windrip is only the lightest cork on the whirlpool. He didn't plot all this thing. With all the justified discontent there is amongst the with all the justified discontent there is against the smart politicians and the plush horses of plutocracy. Oh, if it hadn't been one Windrip, it had been another. We had it coming, we respectables. But that isn't going to make us like it, thought Doremus. That's for y'all, Whitey. Just been sitting around, seeing it be done to other folks, and it it's about to be done to y'all. So, all right, I'm gonna go pee, replenish my fluids, and I'll be right back. Motherfucking back is hurting. My motherfucking back is hurting. Oh fucking yeah. Well, my back is hurting. Yes, my back is hurting. Oh, my back, if you're hurting. Yes, indeed. Whoa. Chapter 9. Those who have never been on the inside in the councils of state can never realize that with really high class statesmen, their chief quality is not political canniness, but a big, rich, overflowing love for all sorts and conditions of people and for the whole land. That love and that patriotism have been my sole guiding principles in politics. My one ambition is to get all Americans to realize that they are and must continue to be the greatest race on the face of this old earth. And second, to realize that whatever apparent differences there may be among us in wealth, knowledge, skill, ancestry, or strength, though, of course, all this does not apply to people who are racially different from us. We are all brothers, bound together in the great and wonderful bond of national unity, for which we should all be very glad. And I think we ought to, for this, be willing to sacrifice any individual gains at all. 0 hour. Berzelius Windrip. Berzelius Windrip, of whom in late summer and early autumn of 1936 there were so many published photographs, showing him popping into cars and out of aeroplanes, dedicating bridges, eating corn pone and side meat with Southerners, and clam chowder and bran with Northerners. Bran addressing the American Legion, the Liberty League, the YMHA, the Young People's Socialist League, the Elks, the Bartenders and Waiters Union, the Anti Saloon League, the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Afghanistan, showing him kissing lady centenarians and shaking hands with ladies called Madame, but never the opposite, showing him in Savile Row riding clothes on Long Island and in overalls and a khaki shirt in the Ozarks. This Buzz Windrip was almost a dwarf, yet with an enormous head, a bloodhound head of huge ears, pendulous cheeks, mournful eyes. He had a luminous, ungrudging smile, which, declared the Washington correspondents, he turned on and off deliberately, like an electric light, but which could make his ugliness more attractive than the simpers of any pretty man. His hair was so coarse and black and straight, and worn so long in the back, that it hinted of Indian blood. Okay, that's silly and dumb. Uh, I don't mind if a character has Indian blood, that's great. But this is not it. Wearing it long in the back, that's pure culture. Nothing to do with blood, so whatever. In the Senate, he preferred clothes that suggested the competent insurance salesman. But when farmer constituents were in Washington, he appeared in a historic 10-gallon hat with a mussy gray cutaway, which somehow you erroneously remembered as a black Prince Albert. Okay, what? I don't know these references. He's in a big hat, mussy gray. Prince Albert. I mean, I guess that's all farmer shit. That's got to be farmer shit. All right. In that costume, he looked like a sawed off museum model of a medicine show doctor. And indeed, it was rumored that during one law school vacation, Buzz Windrip had played the banjo and done card tricks and handed down medicine bottles and managed the shell game for no less scientific an expedition than old Dr. Allagash's traveling laboratory, which specialized in the Choctaw cancer cure, the Chinook consumption soother, and the Oriental remedy for piles and rheumatism prepared from a world old secret formula by the gypsy princess Queen Peshawara. Yeah, we don't use the word gypsy anymore. It's also spelled wrong. Uh it's fucked up. I don't know this character. She might not have even been Roma, but anyway. The company, ardently assisted by Buzz, killed off quite a number of persons who, but for their confidence in Dr. Allagash's bottles of water, coloring matter, tobacco juice, and raw corn whiskey, might have gone early enough to doctors. But since then, Windrip had redeemed himself, no doubt, by ascending from the vulgar fraud of selling bogus medicine, standing in front of a megaphone, to the dignity of selling bogus economics, standing on an indoor platform under mercury vapor lights in front of a microphone. West Wing politics, conservative politics for time immemorial, libertarians, hawkish liberals. Sorry, I'm pretty doctrinaire about economics. I'm pretty much Keynesian all the way. If you don't just give people money and help factories stay open, you capitalism don't work at all. Let's see. He was in stature but a small man. Yet remember that so were Napoleon, Lord Beaverbrook, Stephen A. Douglas, Frederick the Great, and the Dr. Goebbels, who is privily known throughout Germany as Wotan's Mickey Mouse. Wotan? Do you say it Wotan, like Odin? Wotan's Mickey Mouse? I'll try it that way, yeah. And the Dr. Goebbels, who is privily known throughout Germany as Wotan's Mickey Mouse. Doremus Jessup, so inconspicuous an observer, watching Senator Windrip from so humble a boyotia. I've got to look this up. Boyotia. Boyotia. Boeotia. How do you pronounce it? I can't find a pronunciation. Boeotia. Boeotia. Huh. Boeotia. I don't understand why this matters. Why would anyone talk about it? It's a Greek island. Who gives a shit? 1935. I curse you. Oh, it's like a small island. Watching Senator Windrip from so humble a Boeotia could not explain his power of bewitching large audiences. The senator was vulgar, almost illiterate, a public liar easily detected, and in his, quote, ideas, almost idiotic, while his celebrated piety was that of a traveling salesman for church furniture, and his yet more celebrated humor, the sly cynicism of a country store. Certainly, there was nothing exhilarating in the actual words of his speeches, nor anything convincing in his philosophy. His political platforms were only wings of a windmill. 7 years before his predent 7 years before his present credo, derived from Lee Saracen, Hitler, Gottfried Fieder, Rocco, and probably the review of the I Sing, Little Buzz back home had advocated nothing more revolutionary than better beef stew in the county poor farms and plenty of graft for loyal machine politicians with jobs for their brothers-in-law, nephews, law partners, and creditors. Doremus had never heard Windrip during one of his orgasms of oratory, but he had been told by political reporters that under the spell you thought Windrip was Plato, but that on the way home you could not remember anything he had said. Okay, I was gonna say this was reminding me of W. Um, I can't say it about Trump because I've never listened to one of his speeches because he's horrible and I can't stand it. But Obama is the one who I can't remember a damn word he ever said because it didn't matter mostly. I don't know. Google Flint water. There were two things, they told Doremus, that distinguished this prairie Demosthenes. He was an actor of genius. There was no more overwhelming actor on the stage, in the motion pictures, nor even in the pulpit. He would whirl arms, bang tables, glare from mad eyes, vomit biblical wrath from a gaping mouth. But he would also coo like a nursing mother, beseech like an aching lover, and in between tricks would coldly and almost contemptuously jab his crowds with figures and facts that were inescapable, even when, as often happened, they were entirely incorrect. But below this surface stagecraft was his uncommon natural ability to be authentically excited by and with his audience, and they by and with him. He could dramatize his assertion that he was neither a Nazi nor a fascist, but a Democrat, a homespun, Jeffersonian, Lincolnian, Clevelandian, Wilsonian Democrat, and sans scenery and costume, make you see him veritably defending the Capitol against barbarian hordes, the while he innocently presented as his own warm hearted democratic inventions every anti libertarian, anti Semitic madness of Europe. Aside from his dramatic glory, Buzz Windrip was a professional common man. Oh, he was common enough. He had every prejudice and aspiration of every American common man. He believed in the desirability and therefore the sanctity of thick buckwheat cakes with adulterated maple syrup in rubber trays for the ice cubes in his electric refrigerator, in the especial nobility of dogs, all dogs, in the oracles of S. Parks Cadman, in being chummy with all waitresses at all junction lunchrooms, and in Henry Ford. When he became president, he exulted maybe he could get Mr. Ford to come to supper at the White House, and the superiority of anyone who possessed $1 million. He regarded spats, walking sticks, caviar, titles, tea drinking, poetry not daily cited in newspapers, and all foreigners, possibly excepting the British, as degenerate. But he was the common man 20 times magnified by his oratory, so that while the other commoners could understand his every purpose, which was exactly the same as their own, they saw him towering among them, and they raised hands to him in worship. In the greatest of all Native American arts, next to the talkies and those spirituals in which Negroes express their desire to go to heaven, to St. Louis, or almost any place distant from the romantic old plantations, It was 1935. This was probably bad then, too. I'm sorry. Namely, in the art of publicity, Lee Saracen was in no way inferior even to such acknowledged masters as Edward Bernays, the late Theodore Roosevelt, Jack Dempsey, and Upton Sinclair. Saracen had, as it was scientifically called, been, quote, building up Senator Windrip for 7 years before his nomination as president. Where other senators were encouraged by their secretaries and wives, no potential dictator ought ever to have a visible wife, and none ever has had except Napoleon. What the fuck? Come on. Come on! This is fucked up. Again, it's 1935. White America. To expand from village backslabbing to noble, rotund Ciceronian gestures, Saracen had encouraged Windrip to keep up in the great world all of the clownishness, which, along with considerable legal shrewdness and the endurance to make 10 speeches a day, had endeared him to his simple-hearted constituents in his native state. Windrip danced a hornpipe before an alarmed academic audience when he got his first honorary degree. He kissed Miss Flandreau at the South Dakota Beauty Contest. He entertained the Senate, or at least the Senate galleries, with detailed accounts of how to catch catfish, from the bait digging to the ultimate effects of the jug of corn whiskey. He had uh, from the bait digging to the ultimate effects of the jug of corn whiskey, he challenged the venerable Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to a duel with slingshots. Though she was not visible, Windrip did have a wife. Saracen had none, nor was likely to, and Walt Trowbridge was a widower. Buzz's ladies stayed back home, raising spinach and chickens and telling the neighbors that she expected to go to Washington next year. The while Windrip was informing the press that his, quote, Frau was so edifyingly devoted to their two small children and to Bible study that she simply could not be coaxed to come east. But when it came to assembling a political machine, Windrip had no need of counsel from Lee Saracen. Where Buzz was, there were the vultures also. His hotel suite in the capital city of his home state in Washington, in the capital city of his home state, in Washington, in New York, or in Kansas City was like, well, Frank Sullivan once suggested that it resembled the office of a tabloid newspaper upon the impossible occasion of Bishop's cannons setting fire to St. Patrick's Cathedral, kidnapping the Dion quintuplets, and eloping with Greta Garbo in a stolen tank. I guess you had to be there. Comedy. In the, quote, parlor of any of these suites, Buzz Windrip sat in the middle of the room, a telephone on the floor beside him, and for hours he shrieked at the instrument. Hello? Yeah, speaking. Or at the door, come in, come in. And sit down and take a load off your feet. All day, all night, till dawn, he would be bellowing, tell him he can take his bill and go climb a tree. Or, why, certainly, old man. Tickled to death to support it. Utility Corporation's certainly been getting a raw deal. And you tell the governor I want Kippy elected sheriff, and I want the indictment against him quashed, and I want it damn quick. Usually, squatted there cross-legged, he would be wearing a smart belted camel's hair coat with his Usually, squatted there cross-legged, he would be wearing a smart belted camel's hair coat with an atrocious checked cap. Sinclair Lewis. All right, he does this thing. He's got these super long, hard to say sentences. He's got comedy I don't understand, and he describes people after we've been talking about them for pages and chapters. Uh, he's been wearing this ridiculous hat this whole time? Come on. We should have known that. Wish I'd known. In a fury, as he was at least every quarter hour, he would leap up, peel off the overcoat, showing either a white boiled shirt and clerical black bow, or a canary yellow silk shirt with a scarlet tie, fling it on the floor, and put it on again with slow dignity, while he bellowed his anger like Jeremiah cursing Jerusalem, or like a sick cow mourning its kidnapped young. There came to him stockbrokers, labor leaders, distillers, anti vivisectionists, vegetarians, disbarred shyster lawyers, missionaries to China, lobbyists for oil and electricity, advocates of war and of war against war. Gah! Every guy in the country with a bad case of the gimmies comes to see me, he growled the Saracen. He promised to further their causes, to get an appointment to West Point for the nephew who had just lost his job in the creamery. He promised fellow politicians to support their bills if they would support his. He gave interviews upon subsistence farming, backless bathing suits, and the secret strategy of the Ethiopian army. He grinned and I'm sucking at this, guys. I'm rattled. My back hurts really bad for some reason. I had 3 days off and then back to work as a mailman. And I have to work 6 days in a row. That's the deal. All right. He grinned and knee patted and back slapped, and few of his visitors, once they had talked with him, failed to look upon him as their little father and to support him forever. The few who did fail, most of them newspapermen, disliked the smell of him more than before they had met him. Even they, by the unusual spiritedness and color of their attacks upon him, kept his name alive in every column. By the time he had been a senator for 1 year, his machine was as complete and smooth running, and as hidden away from ordinary passengers as the engines of a liner. You guys have to read this. Like, it's available on the internet. I'm here at magiclink.net. But like, take a look at these sentences, and like sometimes he'll capitalize shit like he wants me to capitalize it with my mouth kind of thing. And I don't like, I don't know the AP like standard practice back then. Is he doing this stuff because he's quirky, or is this how everybody wrote back then? Like, it's odd. But what I really don't like is when he tries to do comedy by inserting a modifier before you even know what the sentence is about. So, yeah, this sentence is that. By the time he had been a senator for 1 year, his machine was as complete and smooth running and hidden away from ordinary passengers as the engines of a liner. So I guess like a cruise ship, and the engines are smooth. I mean, that's cool, I guess. Huh. I guess that reminds me of the thesis of this part, that they're telling us that he didn't need anyone's help to build his own political machine, or advice at least. On the beds in any of his suites, there would at the same time repose 3 top hats, 2 clerical hats, a green object with a taxi driver's cap, and 9 ordinary Christian brown felts. I guess that's fedoras? I don't know. Once within 27 minutes, he talked on the telephone from Chicago to Palo Alto, Washington, Buenos Aires, Wilmette, and Oklahoma City. Once in half a day, he received 16 calls from clergymen asking him to condemn the dirty burlesque show, and seven from three. Fuck. And seven from theatrical promoters and real estate owners asking him to praise it. He called the clergyman doctor or brother or both. He called the promoters buddy and pal. He gave equally ringing promises to both, and for both he loyally did nothing whatever. Normally, he would not thought of cultivating foreign alliances, though he never doubted that someday, as president, he would be leader of the World Orchestra. Lee Saracen insisted that Buzz look into a few international fundamentals, such as the relationship of sterling to the lira, the proper way in which to address a baronet, the chances of the Archduke Otto, the London oyster bars, and the brothel near the Boulevard de Sebastopol best to recommend to junketing representatives. But the actual cultivation of foreign diplomats resident in Washington he left to Saracen, who entertained them on terrapin and canvasback duck with black currant jelly in his apartment that was considerably more tapestried than Buzz's own ostentatiously simple Washington quarters. However, in Saracen's place, a room with a large silk-hung Empire double bed was reserved for Buzz. It was Saracen who had persuaded Windrip to let him write Zero Hour, based on Windrip's own dictated notes, and who had beguiled millions into reading, and even thousands into buying, that Bible of economic justice. Saracen, who had perceived there was now such a spate of private political weeklies and monthlies that it was a distinction not to publish one. Saracen, who had the inspiration for Buzz's emergency radio address at 3 a.m. upon the occasion of the Supreme Court's throttling the NRA in May 1935. Though not many adherents, including Buzz himself, were quite certain as to whether he was pleased or disappointed, though not many actually heard the broadcast itself, everyone in the country except sheep herders and Professor Albert Einstein heard about it and was impressed. Yet it was Buzz who all by himself thought of first offending the Duke of York by refusing to appear at the embassy dinner for him in December 1935, thus gaining, in all farm kitchens and parsonages and bar rooms, a splendid reputation for homespun democracy, and of later mollifying his highness by calling on him with a touching little home bouquet of geraniums from the hothouse of the Japanese ambassador, which endeared him, if not necessarily to royalty, yet certainly to the DAR, the English Speaking Union, and all motherly hearts who thought the pudgy little bunch of geraniums too sweet for anything. By the newspaperman, Buzz was credited with having insisted on the nomination of Pearlie Beecroft for vice president at the Democratic Convention. After Doremus had frenetically ceased listening. Beecroft was a Southern tobacco planter and storekeeper, an ex-governor of his state, married to an ex-school teacher from Maine who was sufficiently scented with salt spray and potato blossoms to win any Yankee. But it was not his geographical superiority which made Mr. Beecroft the perfect running mate for Buzz Windrip, but that he was malaria yellowed and laxly mustached, where Buzz's horsey face was ruddy and smooth, while Beecroft's oratory had a vacuity, a profundity of slowly enunciated nonsense, which beguiled such solemn deacons as were irritated by Buzz's cataract of slang. Nor could Saracen ever have convinced the wealthy that the more Buzz denounced them and promised to distribute their millions to the poor, the more they could trust his, quote, common sense and finance his campaign. But with a hint, a grin, a wink, a handshake, Buzz could convince them, and their contributions came in by the hundred thousands, often disguised as assessments on imaginary business partnerships. It had been the peculiar genius of Berzelia water. It had been the peculiar genius of Berzelius Windrip not to wait until he should be nominated for this office or that to begin shanghaiing his band of buccaneers. He had been coaxing in supporters ever since the day when, at the age of 4, he had captivated a neighborhood comrade by giving him an ammonia pistol, which later he thriftily stole back from the comrade's pocket. Buzz might not have learned, perhaps could not have learned, much from sociologists Charles Beard and John Dewey, but they could have learned a great deal from Buzz. And it was Buzz's, not Saracen's, masterstroke that, as warmly as he advocated everyone's getting rich by just voting to be rich, he denounced all fascism and Nazism, so that most of the Republicans who were afraid of democratic fascism and all the Democrats who were afraid of Republican fascism were ready to vote for him. Fuck. So this guy is well, the whole point of this book is that Sinclair Lewis specifically designed this particular guy to appeal to Americans at that time. So, assuming it's not just wild satire, and he actually crafted this character's ideas for very specific reasons, like it tells us a lot about what Sinclair Lewis feared and suspected would work on us. But obviously, it's not 1936 anymore. It's 2020. Things are different. Apparently, we like having a guy who's got gold everything and never admits to ever being sick or scared or anything. Fucking fuck that guy. Um, it's different, right? Um, and honestly, most people didn't predict the exact way that it would look, but yeah, the confused nature of his ideas, the everything revolving around a center of power and his own ego, that is all very, very similar. Chapter 10, quoting here. While I hate befogging my pages with scientific technicalities and even neologies, I feel constrained to say here that the most elementary perusal of the economy of abundance would convince any intelligent student that the Cassandras who miscall the much needed increase in the fluidity of our current circulation inflation, erroneously basing their parallel upon the inflationary misfortunes of certain European nations in the area 1919 to 1923, fallaciously and perhaps inexcusably fail to comprehend the different monetary status in America inherent in our vastly greater reservoir of natural resources. Zero Hour, Berzelius Windrip. Most of the mortgaged farmers, most of the white collar workers who had been unemployed these 3 years and 4 and 5, most of the people on relief rolls who wanted more relief, most of the suburbanites who could not meet the installment payments on the electric washing machine. Such large such large sections of the American Legion as believed that only Senator Windrip would secure for them and perhaps increase the bonus. Such popular Myrtle Boulevard or Elm Avenue preachers as, spurred by the examples of Bishop Prang and Father Coughlin, believed they could get useful publicity out of supporting a slightly queer program that promised prosperity without anyone's having to work for it. The remnants of the Ku Klux Klan and such leaders of the American Federation of Labor as felt they had been inadequately courted and bepromised by the old line politicians, and the non unionized common laborers who felt they had been inadequately courted by the same AF of L, backstreet and over the garage lawyers who had never yet wangled government jobs, the lost legion of the anti saloon league, since it was known that, though he drank a lot, Senator Windrip also praised teetotalism a lot, while his rival, Walt Trowbridge, though he drank but little, said nothing at all in support of the messiahs of prohibition. These messiahs had not found professional morality profitable of late, with the Rockefellers and Wanamaker's no longer praying with them nor paying. Besides these necessitous petitioners, a goodish number of burghers who, while they were millionaires, yet maintained that their prosperity had been sorely checked by the fiendishness of the bankers in limiting their credit. These were the supporters who looked to Berzelius Windrip to play the divine raven and feed them handsomely when he should become president. And from such came most of the fervid elocutionists who campaigned for him through September and October. All right, here we go. Pushing in among this damn it. Pushing in among this mob of camp followers who identified political virtue with money for their rent came a flying squad who suffered not from hunger, but from congested idealism. Intellectuals and reformers and even rugged individualists who saw in Windrip, for all his clownish swindlerism, a free vigor which promised a rejuvenation of the crippled and senile capitalist system. Upton Sinclair wrote about Buzz and spoke for him just as in 1917. Unyielding pacifist though he was, Mr. Sinclair had advocated America's wholehearted prosecution of the Great War, foreseeing that it would unquestionably exterminate German militarism and thus forever end all wars. Most of the Morgan partners, though they may have shuddered a little at association with Upton Sinclair, saw that, however much income they themselves might have to sacrifice, only Windrip could start the business recovery. While Bishop Manning of New York City pointed out that Windrip always spoke reverently of the church and its shepherds, whereas Walt Trowbridge went horseback riding every Sabbath morning and had never been known to telegraph any female relative on Mother's Day. On the other hand, the Saturday Evening Post enraged the small shopkeepers by calling Windrip a demagogue, And the New York Times, once independent Democrat, was anti Windrip. But most of the religious periodicals announced that with a saint like Bishop Prang for backer, Windrip must have been called of God. Even Europe joined in, with the most modest friendliness, explaining that they wished not to intrude on American domestic politics, but only to express personal admiration for that great Western advocate of peace and prosperity, Berzelius Windrip. There came representatives of certain foreign powers, lecturing throughout the land. General Balbo, so popular here because of his leadership of the flight from Italy to Chicago in 1933, a scholar who, though he now lived in Germany and was an inspiration to all patriotic leaders of German recovery, yet had graduated from Harvard University and had been the most popular piano player in his class, namely Dr. Ernst Putzi Hanfstaengl, and Great Britain's lion of diplomacy, the Gladstone of the 1930s, the handsome and gracious Lord Lossiemouth, who as Prime Minister had been known as the Right Honourable Ramsay MacDonald PC. All three of them were expensively entertained by the wives of manufacturers, and they persuaded many millionaires who, in the refinement of wealth, had considered Buzz. All three of them were expensively entertained by the wives of manufacturers, and they persuaded many millionaires who, in the refinement of wealth, had considered Buzz vulgar, that actually he was the world's one hope of efficient international commerce. Father Coughlin took one look at all the candidates and indignantly retired to his cell. Mrs. Adelaide Tarr Gimmich, who would surely have written to the friends she had made at the Rotary Club dinner in Fort Beulah if only she could have remembered the name of the town, was a considerable figure in the campaign. She explained to women voters how kind it was of Senator Windrip to let them go on voting so far, and she sang Berzelia Windrip's Gone to Wash an average of 11 times a day. Buzz himself, Bishop Prang, Senator Porkwood, the fearless liberal and friend of labor and the farmers, and Colonel Osceola Luthorn, the editor, though their prime task was reaching millions by radio, also in a 40-day tram trip, traveled over 27,000 miles through every state in the Union on the scarlet and silver, ebony paneled, silk upholstered, streamlined, diesel engined, rubber padded, air conditioned, aluminum Forgotten Men special. It had a private bar that was forgotten by none save the bishop. The train fares were the generous gift of the combined railways. Over 600 speeches were discharged, ranging from 8-minute hellos delivered to the crowds gathered at stations to 2-hour fulminations in auditoriums and fairgrounds. Buzz was present at every speech, usually starring, but sometimes so hoarse that he could only wave his hand and croak, "Howdy, folks!" while he was spelled by Prang, Porkwood, Colonel Luthorn, or such volunteers from his regiment of secretaries, doctoral consulting specialists in history and economics, cooks, bartenders, and barbers, as could be lured away from playing craps with the accompanying reporters, photographers, sound recorders, and broadcasters. Tiefer of the United Press has estimated that Buzz thus appeared personally before more than 2 million persons. Meanwhile, almost daily hurtling by aeroplane between Washington and Buzz's home, Lee Saracen supervised dozens of telephone girls and scores of girl stenographers who answered thousands of daily telephone calls and letters and telegrams and cables, and boxes containing poison candy, Buzz himself had made the rule that all these girls must be pretty, reasonable, thoroughly skilled, and related to people with political influence. That is gross. That's some fucking Weinstein shit. Back to the reading. For Saracen, it must be said that in this bedlam of, quote, public relations, he never once used contact as a transitive verb. The Honorable Pearlie Beecroft, vice presidential candidate, the Honorable Pearlie Beecroft, vice presidential candidate, specialized on the conventions of fraternal orders, religious denominations, insurance agents, and traveling men. Colonel Dewey Hake, who had nominated Buzz at Cleveland, had an assignment unique in campaigning, one of Saracen's slickest inventions. Hake spoke for Windrip not in the most frequented, most obvious places, but at places so unusual that his appearance there made news. And Saracen and Hake saw to it that there were nimble chroniclers present to get that news. Flying in his own plane, covering 1,000 miles a day, he spoke to 9 astonished miners whom he caught in a copper mine a mile below the surface, while 39 photographers snapped the 9. He spoke from a motorboat to a stilled fishing fleet during a He spoke from a motorboat to a stilled fishing fleet during a fog in Gloucester Harbor. He spoke from the steps of the sub-treasury at noon on Wall Street. He spoke to the aviators and ground crew at Shushan Airport, New Orleans, and even the flyers were ribald only for the first 5 minutes, till he had described Buzz Windrip's gallant but ludicrous efforts to learn to fly. He spoke to state policemen, to stamp collectors, players of chess in secret clubs, and steeplejacks at work. He spoke in breweries, hospitals, magazine offices, cathedrals, crossroad churches, 40 by 30, prisons, lunatic asylums, nightclubs, till the art editors began to send photographs the memo, quote, "For Pete's sake, no more photos, Colonel Hake spieling in sporting houses and Hooskow," unquote. Yet went on using the pictures. For Colonel Dewey Hake was a figure as sharp-lighted almost as Buzz Windrip himself. Son of a decayed Tennessee family with one Confederate general grandfather and one a Dewey of Vermont, he had picked cotton, become a youthful telegraph operator, worked his way through the University of Arkansas and the University of Missouri Law School, settled as a lawyer in the Wyoming Village and then in Oregon, and during the war, he was in 1936 but 44 years old, served in France as captain of infantry with credit. Returned to America, he had been elected to Congress and become a colonel in the militia. He studied military history. He learned to fly, to box, to fence. He was a ramrod-like figure, yet had a fairly amiable smile. He was liked equally by disciplinary army officers of high rank and by such roughnecks as Mr. Shad Ledoux, the Caliban of Doremus Jealous. Fuck! Such long sentences. He was liked equally by disciplinary army officers of high rank and by such roughnecks as Mr. Shad Ledoux, the Caliban of Doremus Jessup. Hake brought to Buzz's fold the very picaroons who had most snickered at Bishop Prang's solemnity. All this while, Hector McGoblin, the cultured doctor and burly boxing fan, co-author with Saracen of the campaign anthem, quote, "Bring out the old-time musket," was specializing in the inspiration of college professors, associations of high school teachers, professional baseball teams, training camps of pugilists, medical meetings, summer schools in which well known authors taught the art of writing to earnest aspirants who could never learn to write, golf tournaments, and all such cultural congresses. But the pugilistic Dr. McGoblin came nearer to danger than any other campaigner. During a meeting in Alabama, when he had satisfactorily damn it. During a meeting in Alabama, where he had satisfactorily proved that no Negro with less than 25% white blood can ever rise to the cultural level of a patent medicine salesman, the meeting was raided. The costly residence section of the whites was raided by a band of colored people headed by a Negro who had been a corporal on the Western Front in 1918. McGoblin and the town were saved by the eloquence of a colored clergyman. Truly, as Bishop Prang said, the apostles of Senator Winthrop were now preaching his message unto all manner of men, even unto the heathen. But what Doremus Jessup said to Buck Titus and Father Parafix was, "This is revolution in terms of Rotary." For those of you who don't know what Rotary is, it's basically the upper middle class, mostly men in a town, and like tons of lawyers, business owners, shit. They sometimes give out scholarships for kids to go study overseas. They got to do a few other things. But yeah, mostly it's so white men can get together and be secretive, like always. Back to it. How long has this been going on? An hour 30. All right. Chapter 11. Quoting. When I was a kid, one time I had an old maid teacher that used to tell me, "Buzz, you're the thickest headed dunce in school." But I noticed that she told me this a whole lot oftener than she used to tell the other kids how smart they were, and I came to be the most talked about scholar in the whole township. The United States Senate isn't so different, and I want to thank a lot of stuffed shirts for their remarks about yours truly. 0 hour, Berzelius Windrip. But there were certain of the heathen who did not heed those heralds Prang and Windrip and Hake and Dr. McGoblin. Walt Trowbridge conducted his campaign as placidly as though he were certain to win. He did not spare himself, but he did not moan over the forgotten men. He'd been one himself as a youngster and didn't think it was so bad. Nor become hysterical at a private bar in a scarlet and silver special tram. Quietly, steadfastly, speaking on the radio and in a few great halls, he explained that he did advocate an enormously improved distribution of wealth, but that it must be achieved by steady digging and not by dynamite that would destroy more than it excavated. He wasn't particularly thrilling. Economics rarely are, except when they have been dramatized by a bishop, staged and lighted by a Saracen, and passionately played by a Buzz Windrip with rapier and blue satin tights. For the campaign, the communists had brightly brought out their sacrificial candidates. In fact, all 7 of the current communist parties had. Since, if they all stuck together, they might entice 900,000 votes, they had avoided such bourgeois grossness by enthusiastic schisms, and their creeds now included the party, the majority party, the Leftist Party, the Trotsky Party, the Christian Communist Party, the Workers' Party, and less baldly named something called the American Nationalist Patriotic Cooperative Fabian Post Marxian Communist Party. It sounded like the names of royalty, but was otherwise dissimilar. But these radical excursions were not very significant compared with the new Jeffersonian Party, suddenly fathered by Franklin D. Roosevelt. 48 hours after the nomination of Winthrop at Cleveland, President Roosevelt had issued his defiance. Senator Winthrop, he asserted, had been chosen not by the brains and hearts of genuine Democrats, but by their temporarily crazed emotions. He would no more support Winthrop because he claimed to be a Democrat than he would support Jimmy Walker. Yet he said he could not vote for the Republican Party, the quote, party of entrenched special privilege, however much in the past 3 years he had appreciated the loyalty, the honesty, the intelligence of Senator Walt Trowbridge. Roosevelt made it clear that his Jeffersonian or true Democratic faction was not a third party in the sense that it was to be permanent. It was to vanish as soon as honest and coolly thinking men got control again of the old organization. Buzz Winthrop aroused mirth by dubbing it the Bull Mouse Party, but President Roosevelt was joined by almost all the liberal members of Congress, Democratic or Republican, who had not followed Walt Trowbridge, by Norman Thomas and the socialists who had not turned communist, by Governors Floyd Olson and Olin Johnston, and by Mayor LaGuardia. The conspicuous fault of the Jeffersonian Party, like the personal fault of Senator Trowbridge, was that it represented integrity and reason in a year when the electorate hungered for frisky emotions, for the peppery sensations associated usually not with monetary systems and taxation rates, but with baptism by immersion in the creek, young love under the elms, straight whiskey, angelic orchestras heard soaring down from the full moon, fear of death when an automobile teeters above a canyon, thirst in a desert and quenching it with spring water. All the primitive sensations which they thought they found in the screaming of Buzz Winthrop. That was a very good bit of business. Far from the hot lighted ballrooms where all these crimson tunic bandmasters shrill squabbled as to which should lead for the moment the tremendous spiritual jazz, far off in the cool hills, a little man named Doremus Jessup, who wasn't even a bass drummer, but only a citizen editor, wondered in confusion what he should do to be saved. He wanted to follow Roosevelt in the Jeffersonian Party, partly for admiration of the man, partly for the pleasure of shocking the ingrown republicanism of Vermont. But he could not believe that the Jeffersonians would have a chance. He did believe that, for all the mothball odor of many of his associates, Walt Trowbridge was a valiant and competent man, and night and day Doremus bounced up and down Beulah Valley campaigning for Trowbridge. Out of his very confusion, there came into his writing a desperate sureness which surprised accustomed readers of The Informer. For once, he was not amused and tolerant. Though he never said anything worse of the Jefferson Party than that it was ahead of its times, in both editorials and news stories, he went after Buzz Winthrop and his gangs with whips, turpentine, and scandal. In person, he was into and out of shops and houses all morning long, arguing with voters, getting miniature interviews. He had expected that traditionally Republican Vermont would give him too drearily easy a task in preaching Trowbridge. What he found was a dismaying preference for the theoretically Democratic Buzz Windrip. And that preference, Doremus perceived, wasn't even a pathetic trust in Windrip's promises of utopian bliss for everyone in general. It was a trust in increased cash for the voter himself and for his family, very much in particular. Okay, two things. One, promise the American people that you'll help them out personally and their family. Two, be trusted. Those two things aren't bad. If you're trusted by a sizable number of people, like, cool, promise them what you think you can accomplish, or what you'd like to accomplish. That's all good. But if you're a liar and you're still trusted, drain the swamp. Most of them had, among all the factors in the campaign, noticed only what they regarded as Windrip's humor and 3 planks in his platform: 5, which promised to increase taxes on the rich; 10, which condemned the Negroes, since nothing so elevates a dispossessed farmer or a factory worker on relief as to have some race, any race, on which he can look down; and especially 11, which announced or seemed to announce that the average toiler would immediately receive $5,000 a year. And ever so many railway station debaters explained that it would really be 10,000. Why, they were going to have every cent offered by Dr. Townsend, plus everything planned by the late Huey Long, Upton Sinclair, and the Utopians all put together. So beatifically did hundreds of old people in Beulah Valley believe this that they smilingly trotted into Raymond Pridewell's hardware store to order new kitchen stoves and aluminum saucepans and complete bathroom furnishings to be paid for on the day after inauguration. Mr. Pridewell, a cobwebbed old Henry Cabot Lodge Republican, lost half his trade by chasing out these happy heirs to fabulous estates, but they went on dreaming, and Doremus, nagging at them, discovered that mere figures are defenseless against a dream. Even a dream of new Plymouths and unlimited cans of sausages and motion picture cameras and the prospect of never having to arise till 7:30 a.m. Is that late? That seems early. I guess I don't have to wake up till 7. Thus answered Alfred Tisra, Snake Tisra, friend to Doremus's handyman Shad Ledoux. Snake was a steel-tough truck driver and taxi owner who had served sentences for assault and for transporting bootleg liquor. He had once made a living catching rattlesnakes and copperheads in southern New England. Under President Windrip, Snake jeeringly assured Doremus he would have enough money to start a damn it. Under President Windrip, Snake jeeringly assured Doremus he would have enough money to start a chain of roadhouses in all the dry communities in Vermont. Ed Howland, one of the lesser Fort Beulah grocers, and Charlie Betts, furniture and undertaking, while they were dead against anyone getting groceries, furniture, or even undertaking on Windrip credit, were all for the population's having credit on other wares. Eris Dilly, a squatter dairy farmer living with a toothless wife and 7 slattern children in a tilted and unscrubbed cabin way up on Mount Terror, snarled at Doremus, who had often taken food baskets and boxes of shotgun shells and masses of cigarettes to Eris. Well, want to tell you, when Mr. Windrip gets in, we farmers are going to fix our own prices on our crops, and not you smart city fellows. Doremus could not blame him. While Buck Titus at 50 looked 30 odd, Eris at 34 looked 50. Lorinda Pike's singularly unpleasant partner in the Beulah Valley Tavern, one Mr. Nipper, whom she hoped soon to lose, combined boasting how rich he was with gloating how much more he was going to get under Windrip. Quote unquote, Professor Staubmeyer quoted nice things Windrip had said about higher pay for teachers. Louis Rotenstern, to prove that his heart at least was not Jewish, became more lyric than any of them. And even Frank Tasbro of the quarries, Metairie Cole of the grist mill and real estate holdings, R.C. Crowley of the bank, who presumably were not tickled by projects that this probably prospects were not tickled by prospects of higher income taxes, smiled pussy cattishly and hinted that Windrip was a quote lot sounder fellow than people knew. But no one in Fort Beulah was a more active crusader for Buzz Windrip than Shad Ledoux. Doremus had known that Shad possessed talent for argument and for display, that he had once persuaded old Mr. Pridewell to trust him for a .22 rifle, value $23, that, removed from the sphere of coal bins and grass-stained overalls, he had once sung Rollicky Bill the Sailor at a smoker of the Ancient and Independent Order of Rams, and that he had enough memory to be able to quote as his own profound opinions the editorials in the Hearst newspapers. Yet, even knowing all this equipment for a political career, an equipment not much short of Buzz Windrip's, Doremus was surprised to find Shad soapboxing for Windrip among the quarry workers, then actually as chairman of a rally in Oddfellows Hall. Shad spoke little, but with brutal taunting of the believers in Trowbridge and Roosevelt. At meetings where he did not speak, Shad was an incomparable bouncer, and in that valued capacity he was summoned to Windrip rallies as far away as Burlington. It was he who, in a militia uniform, handsomely riding a large white plow horse, led the final Windrip parade in Rutland, and substantial men of affairs, even dry goods jobbers, fondly called him Shad. Doremus was amazed, felt a little apologetic over his failure to have appreciated this newfound paragon, as he sat in American Legion Hall and heard Shad bellowing, I don't pretend to be anything but a plain working stiff, but there's 40 million workers like me, and we know that Senator Windrip is the first statesman in years that thinks of what guys like us need before he thinks one doggone thing about politics. Come on, you bozos. The swell folks will tell you not to be selfish. Walt Trowbridge tells you not to be selfish. Well, be selfish and vote for the one man that's willing to give you something. Give you something. And not just grab off every cent and every hour of work that he can get. Doremus groaned inwardly. Oh, my Shad. And you're doing most of this on my time. Sissy Jessup sat on the running board of her coupe, hers by squatter's right, with Julian Falk up from Amherst for the weekend and Malcolm Tasbro wedged in on either side of her. Ah, nuts. Let's quit talking politics. Windrop's going to be elected, so why waste time yodeling when we could drive down to the river and have a swim? Complained Malcolm. He's not going to win without our putting up a tough scrap against him. I'm going to talk to the high school alumni this evening about how they get to tell their parents to vote for either Trowbridge or Roosevelt, snapped Julian Falk. Ha ha ha! And of course, the parents will be tickled to death to do whatever you tell them, Julian. You college men certainly are the goods. Besides, want to be serious about this fool business? Malcolm had the insolent self assurance of beef, slick black hair, and a large car of his own. He was the perfect leader of black shirts, and he looked contemptuously on Julian, who, though a year older, was pale and thinnish. Matter of fact, it'll be a good thing to have Buzz. He'll put a damn quick stop to all this radicalism, all this free speech and libel of our most fundamental institutions. Boston American, last Tuesday, page 8, murmured Sissy. Oh, I didn't murmur that. Let me try it again. Boston American, last Tuesday, page 8, murmured Sissy. And no wonder you're scared of him, Julian. He sure will drag some of your favorite Amherst anarchist props off to the hooskow. And maybe you too, comrade. The two young men looked at each other with slow fury. Sissy quieted them by raging. For heaven's sake, will you two heels quit scrapping? Oh, my dears, this beastly election. Beastly! Seems as if it's breaking up every town, every home. My poor dad, Doremus is just about all in. Man. I was trying to make sure I read the right names and such. That's tough. That's polarization, right? That's just how it do. That's how it do what it do. I'll be right back. I could while away the hours, picking wildflowers, consulting with the rain. How you guys doing? How you feeling? Heavy shit going on? Excuse me. Chapter 12. Quoting now. I shall not be content till this country can produce every single thing we need, even coffee, cocoa, and rubber, and so keep all our dollars at home. If we can do this, and at the same time work up tourist traffic so that foreigners will come from every part of the world to see such remarkable wonders as the Grand Canyon, Glacier, and Yellowstone, etc. parks, the fine hotels of Chicago, and etc., thus leaving their thus leaving their money here, we shall have such a balance of trade as will go far to carry out my often criticized yet completely sound idea of from $3,000 to $5,000 per year for every single family. That is, I mean, every real American family. Such an aspiring vision is what we want, and not all this nonsense of wasting our time at Geneva and talky talk at Lugano, wherever that is. 0 hour, Berzelius Windrip. Election day would fall on Tuesday, November 3rd, and on Sunday evening of the 1st, Senator Windrip played the finale of his campaign at a mass meeting in Madison Square Garden in New York. The garden would hold, with seats and standing room, about 19,000. And a week before the meeting, every ticket had been sold at from 50 cents to $5, and then by speculators resold and resold at from $1 to 20. Doremus had been able to get one single ticket from an acquaintance on one of the Hearst dailies, which, alone among the New York papers, were supporting Windrip. And on the afternoon of November 1st, he traveled the 300 miles to New York for his first visit in 3 years. It was harder to get around back then, I guess. Trains. It had been cold in Vermont with early snow, but the white drifts lay to the earth so quietly in unstained air that the world seemed a silver painted carnival left to silence. Even on a moonless night, a pale radiance came from the snow, from the earth itself, and the stars were drops of quicksilver. But following the red cap, carrying his shabby Gladstone bag, Doremus came out of the Grand Central at 6 o'clock into a gray trickle of cold dishwater from heaven's kitchen sink. The renowned towers, which he expected to see on 42nd Street, were dead in their mummy cloths of ragged fog. And as to the mob that, with cruel disinterest, galloped past him, a new and heedless smear of faces every second, the man from Fort Beulah could think only that New York must be holding its county fair in this clammy drizzle, or else that there was a big fire somewhere. He had sensibly planned to save money by using the subway. The substantial village burger is so poor in the city of the Babylonian Gardens. And he even remembered that there were still to be found in Manhattan 5-cent trolley cars, in which a rustic might divert himself by looking at sailors and poets and shawled women from the steppes of Kazakhstan. To the red cap he had piped with what he conceived to be traveled urbanity. Guess I'll take a trolley, just a few blocks. But deafened and dizzied and elbow jabbed by the crowd, soaked and depressed, he took refuge in a taxi, then wished he hadn't, as he saw the slippery rubber colored pavement, and as his taxi got wedged among other cars stinking of carbon monoxide and frenziedly tooting for release from the jam, a huddle of robot sheep bleating their terror with mechanical lungs of 100 horsepower. That sounds horrible. This sounds like somebody from LA talking about New York, or like somebody from Tacoma, maybe. I don't know. Me from Gig Harbor. Just the thought of it, terrifying. He painfully hesitated before going out again from his small hotel in the West 40s. And when he did, when he muddily crept among the shrill shop girls, the weary chorus girls, the hard cigar clamping gamblers, and the pretty young men on Broadway, he felt himself, with the rubbers and umbrella which Emma had forced upon him, a very Casper Milquetoast. He most noted a number of stray imitation soldiers, without sidearms or rifles, but in a uniform like that of an American cavalryman in 1870. Slant topped blue forage caps, dark blue tunics, light blue trousers with yellow stripes at the seam, tucked into leggings of black rubberoid for what appeared to be the privates, and boots of sleek black leather for officers. Each of them had on the right side of his collar the letters MM, and on the left a five-pointed star. There were so many of them. They swaggered so brazenly, shouldering civilians out of the way, and upon insignificances like Doremus, they looked with frigid insolence. He suddenly understood. These young condottieri were the Minutemen, the private troops of Berzelius Winthrop, about which Doremus had been publishing uneasy news reports. He was thrilled and a little dismayed to see them now. The printed words made brutal flesh. 3 weeks ago, Winthrop had announced that Colonel Dewey Hake had founded, just for the campaign, a nationwide league of Winthrop marching clubs, to be called the Minutemen. It was probable that they had been in formation for months, since already they had 300,000 or 400,000 members. Doremus was afraid the MMs might become a permanent organization, more menacing than the Ku Klux Klan. Their uniform suggested the pioneer America of Cold Harbor and of the Indian fighters under Miles and Custer. Their emblem, their swastika, here Doremus saw the cunning and mysticism of Lee Saracen, was a five-pointed star, because the star on the American flag was five-pointed, whereas the stars of both the Soviet banner and the Jews, the seal of Solomon, were six-pointed. The fact that the Soviet star actually was also five-pointed, no one noticed during these excited days of regeneration. Anyways, it was a nice idea to have this star simultaneously challenge the Jews and the Bolsheviks. The MMs had good intention, even if their symbolisms did slip a little. Yet the craftiest thing about the MMs was that they wore no colored shirts, but only plain white when on parade and light khaki when on outpost duty, so that Buzz Winthrop could thunder, and frequently, black shirts, brown shirts, red shirts, yes, and maybe cow brindle shirts. All these degenerate European uniforms of tyranny. No, sir. The Minutemen are not fascist or communist or anything at all, but plain democratic. The knight champions of the rights of the forgotten men. The shock troops of freedom. Doremus dined on Chinese food, his invariable self-indulgence when he was in a large city without Emma, who stated that chow mein was nothing but fried excelsior with flour paste gravy. He forgot the leering troopers a little. He was happy in glancing at the gilded wood carvings, at the octagonal lanterns painted with doll-like Chinese peasants crossing arched bridges, at a quartet of guests, two male and two female, who looked like public enemies and who all through dinner quarreled with restrained viciousness. When he headed toward When he headed toward Madison Square Garden and the culminating Winthrop rally, he was plunged into a maelstrom. A whole nation, sorry, I did a thing. A whole nation seemed querulously to be headed the same way. He could not get a taxicab, and walking through the dreary storm some 14 blocks to Madison Square Garden, he was aware of the murderous temper of the crowd. 8th Avenue, lined with cheapjack shops, was packed with drab, discouraged people who yet tonight were tipsy with the hashish of hope. They filled the sidewalks, nearly filled the pavement, while irritable motors squeezed tediously through them, and angry policemen were pushed and whirled about, and if they tried to be haughty, got jeered at by lively shopgirls. Through the welter, before Doremus's eyes, jabbed a flying wedge of Minutemen, led by what he was later to recognize as a cornet of MMs. They were not on duty, and they were not belligerent. They were cheering and singing Berzelius went to wash, reminding Doremus of a slightly drunken knot of students from an inferior college after a football victory. He was to remember them so afterward, months afterward, when the enemies of the MMs all through the country derisively called them Mickey Mouses and Minnies. An old man, shabbily neat, stood blocking them and yelled, "To hell with Buzz! 3 cheers for FDR!" The MMs burst into hoodlum wrath. The cornet in command, a bruiser uglier even than Shad Ledoux, hit the old man on the jaw, and he sloped down sickeningly. Then, from nowhere, facing the cornet, there was a chief petty officer of the Navy, big, smiling, reckless. The CPO bellowed, and a voice turned to hurricanes. "Swell bunch of tin soldiers! 90 to 1 grandpappy! Just about even!" The cornet socked him. He laid out the cornet with one foul to the belly. Instantly, the other 8 MMs were on the CPO like sparrows after a hawk. And he crashed, his face suddenly veal white, laced with rivulets of blood. The 8 kicked him in the head with their thick marching shoes. They were still kicking him when Doremus wriggled away, very sick, altogether helpless. He had not turned away quickly enough to avoid seeing an MM trooper, girlish faced, crimson lipped, fawn eyed, throw himself on the fallen cornet and, whimpering, stroke that roustabout's roast beef cheeks with shy gardenia petal fingers. I don't know what that was all about, but that felt a little gay panicky. I'm not sure. The girlish faced, fawn eyed thing is a little odd. The fallen cornet. It's not like the guy killed the cornet. It's like he's weak. I don't know. The whole thing's weird. There were many arguments, a few private fistfights, and one more battle before Doremus reached the auditorium. A block from it, some 30 MMs, headed by a battalion leader, something between a captain and a major, started raiding a street meeting of communists. A Jewish girl in khaki, her bare head soaked with rain, was beseeching from the elevation of a wheelbarrow. "Fellow travelers, don't just chew the rag and sympathize. Join us! Now! It's life and death!" 20 feet from the communists, a middle-aged man who looked like a social worker was explaining the Jeffersonian Party, recalling the record of President Roosevelt, and reviling the communists next door as word-drunk, un-American cranks. Half his audience were people who might be competent voters. Half of them, like half of any group on this evening of tragic fiesta, were cigarette sniping boys in hand-me-downs. The 30 MMs cheerfully smashed into the communists. The battalion leader reached up, slapped the girl speaker, dragged her down from the wheelbarrow. His followers casually waded in with fists and blackjacks. Doremus, more nauseated, feeling more helpless than ever, heard the smack of a blackjack on the temple of a scrawny Jewish intellectual. Amazingly, then, the voice of the rival Jeffersonian leader spiraled up into a scream. "Come on, you! Going to let those hellhounds attack our communist friends? Friends now, by God!" With which the mild bookworm leaped into the air, came down squarely upon a fat Mickey Mouse, capsized him, seized his blackjack, took time to kick another MM's shins before arising from the wreck, sprang up, and waded into the raiders as, Doremus guessed, he would have waded into a table of statistics on the proportion of butter fat in loose milk in 97.7% of shops on Avenue B. Till then, only half a dozen Communist Party members had been facing the MMs, their backs to a garage wall. 50 of their own, 50 Jeffersonians besides now joined them, and with bricks and umbrellas and deadly volumes of sociology, they drove off the enraged MMs, partisans of Bella Kun side by side with the partisans of Professor John Dewey, until a riot squad of policemen battered their way in to protect the MMs by arresting the girl communist speaker and the Jeffersonian. Oh God, that's rough. Doremus had often, quote, headed up sports stories about Madison Square Garden prize fights, but he did know that the place had nothing to do with Madison Square, from which it was a day's journey by bus, that it was decidedly not a garden, that the fighters there did not fight for prizes, but for fixed partnership shares in the business, and that a good many of them did not fight at all. The mammoth building, as in exhaustion Doremus crawled up to it, was entirely ringed with MMs, elbow to elbow, all carrying heavy canes, and at every entrance, along every aisle, the MMs were rigidly in line, with their officers galloping about, whispering orders, and bearing uneasy rumors like scared calves in a dipping pen. These past weeks, hungry miners, dispossessed farmers, Carolina mill hands had greeted Senator Winthrop with a flutter of worn hands beneath gasoline torches. Now he was to face not the unemployed, for they could not afford 50-cent tickets, but the small, scared side street traders of New York, who considered themselves altogether superior to clodhoppers and mine creepers, yet were as desperate as they. The swelling mass that Doremus saw, proud in seats or standing chin to nape in the aisles, in a reek of dampened clothes, was not romantic. They were people concerned with the tailor's goose, the tray of potato salad, the card of hooks and eyes, the leech like mortgage on the owner driven taxi, with at home the baby's diapers, the dull safety razor blade, the awful rise in the cost of rump steak and kosher chicken, and a few, and very proud, civil service clerks and letter carriers and superintendents of small apartment houses, curiously fashionable in $17 ready-made suits and feebly stitched foulard ties, which boasted, I don't know why all these bums go on relief. I may not be such a whiz, but let me tell you, even since 1929, I've never made less than $2,000 a year. Manhattan peasants, kind people, industrious people, generous to their aged, eager to find any desperate cure for the sickness of worry over losing the job. Most facile material for any rabble rouser. The historic rally opened with extreme dullness. A regimental band played the tales from Hoffman barcarolle with no apparent significance and not much more liveliness. The Reverend Dr. Hendrik van Lollop of St. Apolloge's Lutheran Church offered prayer, but one felt that probably it had not been accepted. Senator Porkwood provided a dissertation on Senator Windrip, which was composed in equal parts of apostolic adoration of Buzz and of the uhs with which Senator Porkwood always interspersed his words. And Windrip wasn't yet even in sight. Colonel Dewey Hake, nominator of Buzz at the Cleveland Convention, was considerably better. He told 3 jokes and an anecdote about a faithful carrier pigeon in the Great War, which had seemed to understand, really better than many of the human soldiers, just why it was that the Americans were over there fighting for France against Germany. The connection of this ornithological hero with the virtues of Senator Windrip did not seem evident, but after having sat under Senator Porkwood, the audience enjoyed the note of military gallantry. Doremus felt that Colonel Hake was not merely rambling, but pounding on towards something definite. His voice became more insistent. He began to talk about Windrip. My friend, the one man who dares beard the monetary lion, the man who in his great and simple heart cherishes the woe of every common man, as once did the brooding tenderness of Abraham Lincoln. Then, wildly waving toward a side entrance, he shrieked, "And here he comes, my friends, Buzz Windrip!" The band hammered out "The Campbells Are Coming." A squadron of Minutemen, smart as horse guards, carrying long lances with starred pennants, clicked into the gigantic bowl of the auditorium, and after them, shabby in an old blue serge suit, nervously twisting a sweat-stained slouch hat, stooped and tired, limped Berzelius Windrip. The audience leaped up, thrusting one another aside to have a look at the deliverer, cheering like artillery at dawn. Windrip started prosaically enough. You felt rather sorry for him, so awkwardly did he lumber up the steps to the platform across to the center of the stage. He stopped, stared owlishly. Then he quacked monotonously. First time I ever came to New York, I was a greenhorn. No, don't laugh. Maybe I still am. But I'd already been elected a United States Senator, and back home, the way they'd serenaded me, I thought I was some pumpkins. I thought my name was just about as familiar to everybody as Al Capone's or Camel Cigarettes or Castoria, Babies Cry for It. But I come to New York on my way to Washington and say I sat in my hotel lobby here for 3 days, and the only fella ever spoke to me was the hotel detective. And when he did come up and address me, I was tickled to death. I thought he was going to tell me the whole burg was pleased by my condescending to visit them. But all he wanted to know was I a guest of the hotel, and did I have any right to be holding down a lobby chair permanently that way? And tonight, friends, I'm pretty near as scared of old Gotham as I was then. The laughter, the hand clapping were fair enough, but the proud electors were disappointed by his drawl, his weary humility. Doremus quivered hopefully. Maybe he isn't going to get elected. Windrip outlined his too familiar platform. Doremus was interested only in observing that Windrip misquoted his own figures regarding the limitation of fortunes in point 5. He slid into a rhapsody of general ideas, a mishmash of polite regards to justice, freedom, equality, order, prosperity, patriotism, and any number of other noble but slippery abstractions. Doremus thought he was being bored until he discovered that at some moment which he had not noticed, he had become absorbed and excited. Something in the intensity with which Windrip looked at his audience, looked at all of them, his glance slowly taking them in from the highest perched seat to the nearest, convinced them that he was talking to each individual directly and solely, that he wanted to take each of them into his heart, that he was telling them the truths, the imperious and dangerous facts that had been hidden from them. They say I want money, power. Say, I've turned down offers from law firms right here in New York of 3 times the money I'll get as president. And power? Why, the president is the servant of every citizen in the country, and not just of the considerate folks, but also of every crank that comes pestering him by telegram and phone and letter. And yet, it's true. It's absolutely true. I do want power. Great, big, imperial power. But not for myself. No, for you. The power of your permission to smash the Jew financiers who've enslaved you, who are working you to death to pay the interest on their bonds, the grasping bankers, and not all of them Jews by a darn sight, the crooked labor leaders just as much as the crooked bosses, and most of all, the sneaking spies of Moscow that want you to lick the boots of their self-appointed tyrants that rule not by love and loyalty like I want to, but by the horrible power of the whip, the dark cell, the automatic pistol. He pictured then a paradise of democracy in which, with the old political machines destroyed, every humblest worker would be king and ruler, dominating representatives elected from among his own kind of people, and these representatives not growing indifferent, as hitherto they had done, once they were far off in Washington, but kept alert to the public interest by the supervision of a strengthened executive. It sounded almost reasonable for a while. The supreme actor, Buzz Windrip, was passionate, yet never grotesquely wild. He did not gesture too extravagantly. Only, like Gene Debs of old, he reached out a bony forefinger, which seemed to jab into each of them and hook out each heart. It was his mad eyes, big, staring, tragic eyes, that startled them, and his voice, now thundering, now humbly pleading, that soothed them. He was so obviously an honest and merciful leader, a man of sorrows and acquaint with woe. Doremus marveled. I'll be hanged. Why, he's a darn good sort when you come to meet him, and warm-hearted. He makes me feel as if I'd been having a good evening with Buck and Steve Parafix. What if Buzz is right? What if, in spite of all the demagogic pap that I suppose he has got to feed out to the boobs, he's right in claiming that it's only he and not Trowbridge or Roosevelt that can break the hold of the absentee owners. And these Minutemen, his followers, oh, they were pretty nasty, what I saw out on the street, but still, most of them are mighty nice, clean-cut young fellows. Seeing Buzz and then listening to what he actually says does kind of surprise you, kind of makes you think. But what Mr. Windrip actually had said, Doremus could not remember an hour later when he had come out of the trance. He was so convinced then that Windrip would win that on Tuesday evening he did not remain at the informer office until the returns were all in. But if he did not stay for the evidences of the election, they came to him. Past his house after midnight, through muddy snow, tramped a triumphant and reasonably drunken parade, carrying torches and bellowing to the air of Yankee Doodle new words revealed just that week by Mrs. Adelaide Tarr Gimmich. The snake's disloyal to our buzz. We're riding on a rail. The wish to God they never was when we get them in jail. Buzz and keep it up to victory. He's floated. You were a most ungrateful pup unless for Buzz you voted. Every MM gets a whip to use upon some traitor, and every anti-Buzz will skip. Today we'll tend to later. Anti-buzz, a word credited to Mrs. Gimmich, but more probably invented by Dr. Hector McGoblin, was to be extensively used by lady patriots as a term expressing such vicious disloyalty to the state as might call for the firing squad. Yet, like Mrs. Gimmich's splendid synthesis, Unkies, for soldiers of the AEF, it never really caught on. God, it's getting harder to read it since we're so close to an election. Oh, sorry. Among the winter-coated paraders, Doremus and Sissy thought they could make out Shad Ledoux, Eris Dilly, that philoprogenitive squatter from Mount Terror, Charlie Betts, the furniture dealer, and Tony Mogliani, the fruit seller, most ardent expounder of Italian fascism in central Vermont. And though he could not be sure of it in the dimness behind the torches, Doremus rather thought that the lone large motor car following the procession was that of his neighbor, Francis Tasbro. Next morning, at the informer office, Doremus did not learn of so very much damage wrought by the triumphant Nordics. They had merely upset a couple of privies, torn down and burned the tailor shop sign of Louis Rotenstern, and somewhat badly beaten Clifford Little, the jeweler, a slight, curly-headed young man whom Shad Ledoux despised because he organized theatricals and played the organ in Mr. Falk's church. That night, Doremus found on his front porch a notice in red chalk upon butcher's paper. You will get yours, Dory, sweetheart, unless you get right down on your belly and crawl in front of the MM and the League and the Chief and I, a friend. It was the first time that Doremus had heard of, quote, the Chief, a sound American variant of the leader or the head of the government, as a popular title for Mr. Windrip. It was soon to be made official. Doremus burned the red warning without telling his family, but he often woke to remember it, not very laughingly. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it there. This book is not for the faint of heart, man. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 5 chapters? 5 chapters is probably enough. Man. Oh, life is weird. Well, find us on Twitter at EIA Podcast. Email me, everythingisawesomepodcast at gmail.com. You want to have me read some of your work, critique, recommend a guest, whatever. Shoot that to me. Listen to the podcast. Everything is awesome. I also have other shows, Shattered Worlds RPG and The War for the Tower are actual play podcasts. Good Idea and Something Wonderful Right Away, which are hilarious improv shows. Um, and on here reading my chapters from my book and whatnot. So get out there, support a Black Lives Matter protester of your choice. Get out there and do good. Um, Tell the truth, and if you have to at some point go underground, I'll find you there. Um, we got to do what we can to make this world a better place. So hopefully we can still do it without, a whole lot of troubles. Yeah. Have a good evening. Bye.